Right now, if you're born in a hospital, it feels completely normal. A bright room, monitors beeping, a doctor standing by, clean white sheets, the quiet hum of machines doing exactly what they're built to do. But for almost the entire span of human history, that idea wouldn't have made any sense at all. So who delivered every single baby, for tens of thousands of years, before hospitals existed? The answer isn't doctors. It's a role that existed long before doctors did. Midwifery traces back to the Paleolithic era, roughly 40,000 years ago. Birth happened in genuinely life-threatening conditions, with no medicine, no sterile tools, none of the safety nets we now take for granted. Picture it, firelight flickering against the walls of a shelter, the cold pressing in from outside, a small circle of women crouched close together in the dark, no way to call for help beyond the people already in the room. Women largely relied on themselves to get through labor, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations, some of it even shaped by simply watching how other mammals gave birth in the wild. For nearly all of that time, hospitals simply didn't exist. Birth happened at home, in the same space someone cooked and slept, attended by a midwife and a small circle of trusted assistants. Archaeological and textual evidence places midwives practicing in a documented capacity as far back as 1900 BCE. But being trusted with something this important also made midwives targets for suspicion, danger, and eventually, accusations that could get them killed. We'll get to that. First, how did this knowledge even survive for tens of thousands of years, passed down with no hospitals, no formal schools, nothing written down at all? For most of this history, midwifery lived entirely in oral tradition, taught through apprenticeship, most often passed directly from mother to daughter, generation folding into generation without a single page of instruction, a lineage carried entirely in memory and hands rather than ink. Then, in ancient Egypt, something changed. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts in existence, contains direct references to birthing practices and the role of the midwife, giving historians one of the first written glimpses into a profession that had already existed, unrecorded, for tens of thousands of years. Once civilizations began writing things down, the details of what actually happened inside the birthing room become much clearer, pulled slowly out of centuries of silence, and considerably stranger than you might expect. Long before any medical test could confirm a pregnancy, ancient societies developed their own methods, some clever, some almost bizarre, tested and repeated by women searching for any sign, any clue their bodies could offer. Historical texts describe practices like examining the visible veins across a woman's breasts for changes, seating her over a mixture of beer and mashed dates and watching closely for vomiting, and even inserting an onion internally, then checking whether its scent could later be detected on her breath. It's worth being direct here, historians aren't certain how seriously these methods were actually trusted as medicine, versus functioning more as folk belief passed down alongside genuine knowledge. Fascinating, certainly. Reliable, far less clear. Detecting a pregnancy was one thing. Surviving the birth itself was an entirely different challenge, and in some parts of the ancient world, not everyone received the same level of care. In ancient Rome, the quality of care a woman received during childbirth depended heavily on one factor: money. Wealthier Roman families could afford professionally trained midwives, women skilled specifically in managing complications, positioned only steps away the moment anything went wrong, ready with tools and technique the moment labor turned difficult. Poorer families, without access to that same trained expertise, often had no midwife at all, relying instead on whichever female relatives happened to be present when labor began, doing their best with nothing but experience and instinct. Pregnancy itself was measured in lunar months, with a baby considered fully born in the 10th. And men, notably, were kept out of the room entirely, unless a physician was specifically required for a high-status mother facing serious complications. But one Roman-era physician's writings would go on to shape childbirth practices for generations. In the 2nd century CE, the physician Cyranus of Ephesus authored what stands as one of history's most comprehensive obstetric manuals, covering prenatal care, the stages of labor, and newborn health in remarkable detail, the kind of careful, page-by-page observation that suggests years spent at the bedside, watching, learning, refining. Among his documented contributions was a specific technique for turning a fetus during a complicated birth, a method detailed enough, and effective enough, to earn a lasting place in the history of obstetric care. On the other side of the world, an entirely different culture was treating childbirth not just as medicine, but as something sacred in aristocratic households of Heian-era Japan. Between 794 and 1185 CE, childbirth became a carefully staged, spiritually significant event. The birthing room itself was deliberately positioned in the north of the house, and dressed entirely in white, from floor to fabric, every surface chosen with intention, nothing left to chance. Trusted midwives attended the mother, while prayers were recited throughout labor, soft voices carrying through the white-draped room, seeking protection for both mother and child through a moment considered as spiritually charged as it was physically dangerous. For all of this care, all of this ritual and respect surrounding birth, one dangerous era was approaching, an era where simply being a midwife could put your own life at risk. During the medieval and early modern periods, the very knowledge that made midwives so essential also made them targets. Women skilled in herbal remedies and birth complications increasingly fell under religious and political suspicion, their gentle, hands-on expertise suddenly reframed as something to fear rather than trust. Some midwives, specifically because of their healing knowledge, were swept into accusations of witchcraft and heresy during the witch trials of the period, their expertise reframed almost overnight as something sinister rather than something needed. A woman who once delivered your children now standing accused in front of a tribunal for the exact same knowledge that once made her indispensable. And yet, even during this dangerous era, midwives were often quietly outperforming the very physicians who were beginning to replace them. When male physicians started attending births more regularly in the 1700s and 1800s, it wasn't automatically the improvement it appeared to be. Before the discovery of germ theory and the widespread adoption of antiseptics, physicians frequently moved from patient to patient without washing their hands in between, carrying invisible danger from one bedside straight to the next without ever realizing it, unknowingly spreading infection from one birth to the next. Midwives, by contrast, often produced better outcomes during this same period, largely because they weren't carrying that same infection risk from patient to patient. So if midwives were often the safer choice, what actually convinced the world to move birth into hospitals at all? The shift, when it finally came, happened astonishingly fast. In 1933, only 35% of all births in the United States took place in a hospital. By 1955, just over 2 decades later, that number had climbed to 95%, a complete reversal within a single generation. An entire tradition of home birth quietly emptied out and replaced almost overnight. But this rapid shift wasn't only about safety. Early hospital birth often came at a real cost to a woman's autonomy. Women frequently kept in a fixed supine position throughout labor, sometimes physically restrained at the hands and feet, and routinely barred from having any family or friends present in the room, alone in a way no birthing room in the previous 40,000 years had ever truly been. A small but telling marker of just how recent this entire shift really is, Jimmy Carter, born in 1924, was the first sitting U.S. president in history to have been born inside a hospital. For 39,960 of the last 40,000 years, birth belonged to women helping women. Hospitals have only been part of that story for the last blink of an eye. Long before there were hospitals, monitors, or medicine as we know it, there was simply one woman helping another through the hardest and most human moment there is, and for nearly all of history, that was enough.